The wind rolled across the desert like a whisper from the past, stirring the dust that clung to the earth as if afraid to let go. The sun hung low, heavy and red, spilling its glow over the land that had seen too much blood and too many broken promises. Somewhere beyond the ridge a coyote cried, the sound thin and lonely, echoing through the canyons like a warning. A wagon wheel creaked in the distance, and the smell of smoke drifted faintly through the dry air. It was evening on the frontier, that uneasy hour when silence carried more weight than words. A woman stood by the dying fire, her hand resting gently on her rounded belly. Her face was pale beneath the fading light, and her eyes were full of worry. The child she carried had made every mile of the journey harder, but she hadn't stopped once. Behind her, the wooden wagon leaned slightly on one side, its canvas torn and stained from days on the trail. The horses were tied near the riverbank, restless and uneasy, stamping at the ground as if they could sense the tension in the air. She turned as she heard footsteps approaching. The man coming toward her was unlike any she had ever known. His skin was bronze, his hair long and dark as the raven's wing, and the quiet power in his movements spoke of a life spent among shadows and sun. He was Apache, and the way he carried himself told her he had seen battles that would haunt a lifetime. Yet his eyes, though sharp, softened when they met hers. There was something unspoken between them, something neither dared name aloud. The world they stood in was one of borders, some drawn on maps, others carved into hearts. She had come from a small settlement to the east, a place that prided itself on being civilized. But civilization had not been kind to her. Her husband had been gone for months, taken by fever on the trail, and since then she had wandered between towns that offered little more than suspicion and cold stares. It was in that lonely crossing of fate that she had met the Apache warrior who now stood beside her. The man who had saved her when the outlaws came, he had appeared from the dust, silent as a storm, and in minutes the men who had threatened her lay scattered on the ground. She never asked his name that day, and he never offered it. What she knew was that he had stayed. Through each mile of the desert, through storms and thirst, he had guarded her like a shadow. Sometimes she wondered why. As the fire cracked softly, he crouched near the flames, sharpening the blade of his knife against a stone. The steady, rasping sound filled the silence. She watched him, her fingers tightening over her stomach, as the child inside shifted restlessly. "You shouldn't fight anymore," she said, her voice low but trembling. "Please don't fight. Not for me." He looked up slowly, his expression unreadable in the dim light. The corners of his mouth lifted in a faint, almost sad smile. "I'm already fighting for you," he said. Something in his tone made her heart twist. There was no pride in his words, only truth, quiet and steady, like the beat of the earth beneath them. She turned her gaze toward the horizon. Where the last trace of sunlight bled into the desert, she didn't know what. Frightened her more the men who might be hunting them or the feelings that had begun to grow in her heart. The frontier was no place for tender emotions, yet she couldn't stop the warmth that came whenever he looked at her. And still, she knew how the world would see them. She was a settler's widow. He was a man from a tribe her people had long feared. The night deepened, stars scattered across the sky like silver dust. The air turned cool, and a strange stillness settled around them. In that silence, memories came to her of home, of a husband whose laughter had once filled their small cabin, of promises buried under too much loss. She had thought love was something that lived only in the past. But now, with this Apache beside her, she wasn't so sure. He moved closer to the fire, feeding it another branch. The flames lit the lines of his face, strong, scarred, beautiful in a way that came from endurance rather than ease. She wanted to ask him what he was thinking, what dreams he carried behind those dark eyes. But she didn't. Words felt too fragile for the moment. The wind shifted suddenly, bringing with it a scent of danger smoke. Horses, men. His head lifted. Without a word, he stood and stepped into the darkness, his senses alert. She rose too, her heart thudding as fear crawled up her spine. He disappeared for a moment, only the faint rustle of brush marking his path. Then he returned, his expression grim. "They're coming," he said quietly. "Who?" She whispered. He didn't answer at first, His gaze swept the camp, measuring distance, cover, escape. "Riders," he finally said. "Too many." Her hands trembled. "Are they soldiers?" He shook his head. "No, worse. Men who sell death for coins." Her breath caught. The same kind who had taken her husband, who had left her alone on the trail before the Apache found her. Her pulse quickened as she looked at him, and though the fear in her eyes was clear, so was the trust. "What do we do?" He stepped closer, his voice low and sure. "You stay behind the rocks. If they come near, you don't move. No matter what happens." "I can't just hide," she said. "You can't face them alone." "I have faced worse," he replied. "There was no boast in it, only fact, and I have something to fight for now." She reached out instinctively, her hand brushing against his arm. "Please," she said softly, "don't fight." "You don't have to." He turned toward her, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. His eyes met hers, and in them she saw the storm he carried, the weight of battles fought, the loss, the longing. Then he smiled that quiet, knowing smile. "I'm already fighting for you." The sound of hooves broke the stillness. Distant at first, then closer, pounding like thunder through the canyons. The horses were restless now, pulling against their ropes. She clutched her shawl tighter, watching as he slipped his rifle from its leather cover. The firelight flickered against the metal, painting him in hues of flame and shadow. He glanced back once, his gaze lingering on her face, as if memorizing it. She wanted to call out, to stop him, but the words caught in her throat. The air seemed to thicken, heavy with dust and dread. Somewhere beyond the ridge, the riders shouted a rough, angry sound that carried across the open land. He moved toward the darkness, each step silent, steady, full of purpose. She watched him disappear beyond the circle of light, her heart aching with fear and something deeper she didn't dare name. The night swallowed him whole, leaving her alone with the sound of wind and the faint crackle of the dying fire. Then came the first gunshot, sharp, distant, echoing through the canyon. She gasped, pressing a hand over her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. Another shot followed, then a cry. Her body trembled as the child within her kicked, as if feeling her terror. The desert around her pulsed with noise hooves, gunfire, shouts that rose and fell like waves. She wanted to run, but her legs wouldn't move. All she could do was whisper into the night, her voice breaking. "Please come back. Please." Somewhere out there, in the darkness, the Apache fought alone, fierce, unyielding. She couldn't see him, but she felt him. Every heartbeat, every breath, carried the weight of his promise. And though the gunfire grew louder, though the night itself seemed to tremble, she held on to his words. The only thing standing between her and despair. "I'm already fighting for you." The sound of another shot tore through the night, closer now. The fire flickered, dying down to embers. She clutched her belly, staring toward the darkness, waiting, praying to see his shadow reappear through the smoke and dust. But the silence that followed felt endless. The desert stretched before her, vast and cruel, holding its secrets tight. And in that heavy stillness, she knew the fight was far from over. The air grew colder as the night dragged on, and every sound seemed sharper, closer. The woman crouched behind the rocks as he had told her, her hands pressed tight against her stomach. The desert stretched endless before her, but she could no longer see where the land ended and the sky began. The fire behind her had nearly burned out, leaving only a faint orange glow that flickered weakly in the dark. She listened for any sign of him, a voice, a footstep. Anything but. There was only silence now. The child stirred inside her again, and she whispered softly, trying to calm both of them. "He'll come back," he promised. Her voice was barely more than a breath, lost to the night wind. She waited, counting the seconds between each distant echo, her heart refusing to rest. Every creak of the wagon, every whisper of wind through dry grass made her flinch. When she finally heard movement again, it wasn't from where she expected. From behind her came the sound of hooves, slow, cautious. Her pulse jumped. She turned, straining her eyes in the dim light. A shadow moved near the wagon, tall and still. For one terrifying moment, she couldn't tell who it was. Then he stepped into view, walking with a heavy limp, blood darkening the edge of his sleeve. Relief flooded her so fast it made her dizzy. He came closer, his breathing rough, his face marked with dust and sweat. He didn't speak right away, just glanced around, checking the horizon. When he finally met her eyes, he gave a slight nod. "They're gone," he said, his voice quiet but steady. Her chest tightened. "Are you hurt?" "Not enough to stop," he answered, lowering himself beside the fire. He pressed a hand to his shoulder, but she could see him trying to hide the pain. He had been shot, she knew it, but he wasn't the kind to show weakness. She wanted to reach for him to help, but something held her back. Maybe it was the way he sat still, alert, as if the danger wasn't over. The desert around them felt too quiet now, the kind of quiet that follows chaos, but doesn't promise peace. "Who were they?" she asked. "Men from the South Trail," he said after a pause. "Traitors, outlaws. They've been following for 2 days," her breath caught. "Following us?" He nodded once. "They saw your wagon near the ridge. I thought you'd be easy to take." She closed her eyes for a moment, her hand trembling. "Why would they still come after us? We have nothing." He looked toward the darkness, as though seeing something she could not. 2 men like that, having nothing, makes you easier to kill. His words sank into her slowly, cold and heavy. She had known danger before, but it had always felt distant, like something that happened to others. Now it was beside her, breathing the same air. And yet sitting there under the same stars, she realized she trusted him more than anyone she had ever known. The silence stretched between them again, broken only by the soft crackle of dying embers. The Apache stared into the fire, his face unreadable. Finally, she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "You didn't have to stay with me all this way. You could have gone back to your people." He didn't answer right away. When he did, his tone was low and thoughtful. "There's no going back for me." She looked at him, puzzled. "Why?" His gaze stayed on the flames. "The white soldiers came last winter. They burned the valley. Many were taken. The rest scattered." He paused, his jaw tightening. "My brother was among them." Her throat tightened. "I'm sorry," she said softly. He nodded once, not in acceptance, but in quiet acknowledgement. "Since then, I walk alone." The weight of his words settled between them like dust. She wanted to ask more, but something in his expression told her not to. There were wounds that couldn't be touched, not even with kindness. The wind picked up again, carrying with it a low whistle through the canyon. He glanced toward the east, where a faint gray light had begun to touch the edge of the sky. "We move when it's bright," he said. "They may come back." She nodded, though her body was weary. The thought of traveling again filled her with dread, but she trusted his judgment. She tried to rest a little before dawn, curling beneath her blanket, though her eyes refused to close. She listened to the sounds of him tending to the horses, the steady rhythm of his movements somehow easing her fear. When morning came, pale and cold, they set out across the flat plain. The world around them was painted in shades of gold and rust, stretching endless beneath a sky so wide it made her feel small. The wagon moved slowly, creaking with each turn of the wheel. He walked beside it, his rifle slung across his shoulder. Scanning the land as the hours passed, she began to see how far they still had to go. The desert was unforgiving, but somewhere beyond it lay safety, or so she hoped. Every day was a balance between hope and exhaustion. At night, they made small fires and shared what little food they had left. She learned that he spoke little, not out of coldness, but because silence to him carried meaning. One evening, as the sun sank behind the cliffs, she finally asked what had been lingering in her mind. "Why did you save me that night?" He didn't look at her. "Because you were not meant to die there." "That's not an answer," she said gently. He paused, his jaw tightening. "When I found you, I saw fear, but I also saw strength. I thought maybe the spirits sent me that way for a reason." She felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. And what reason would that be? He turned his head slightly, his eyes catching the fading light, to fight for something that still matters. The way he said it made her heart ache. She wanted to believe him, to believe that there was still something worth fighting for in this broken land. But the world had taken so much already. As the days stretched into weeks, their journey became a rhythm of survival, moving by day, resting by night, watching the sky for signs of storms or riders. The bond between them deepened, though neither spoke of it. Sometimes she caught him watching her, his expression unreadable. As if trying to understand something about her he couldn't put into words. One night, as they camped near a riverbed, she awoke to find him standing a few paces away, looking toward the distant hills. The moon was high, silvering the land around them. She rose quietly and joined him. "Do you ever think about leaving this land?" she asked. He didn't answer for a long moment. "A man belongs where his heart is buried," he finally said. "Mine is here." She followed his gaze, wondering what memories lay in that distant darkness. "And if you could find peace somewhere else?" He gave a small shake of his head. "Peace is not a place. It's a fight you carry." She thought of those words long after he spoke them. It struck her that maybe they weren't so different after all, two souls wandering a land that had no mercy, each searching for something to believe in, but peace was far from them still. As they traveled deeper west, signs of pursuit, return tracks in the dirt, smoke on the horizon, a feeling that eyes watched them from afar. He noticed first, though he said little. His steps became more cautious, his eyes sharper. One evening, he stopped suddenly and crouched, studying the ground. She froze, clutching the reins. "What is it?" "3 horses," he said quietly. "2 men, maybe more behind." Her stomach turned. "Are they the same ones?" He gave a slow nod. "They're close." She felt her breath catch. "What will we do?" He stood, his gaze sweeping the horizon. "We keep moving. If they follow through the pass, we'll face them there." His calmness should have comforted her, but it didn't. She could feel something gathering in the air, heavy and inevitable. As they rode on, the wind carried whispers of danger-broken branches, the faint echo of hoofbeats in the distance. The Apache moved like a shadow beside her, silent and sure, his hand never far from his weapon. When night came again, they stopped near the rocks at the edge of the pass. The moon rose, pale and cold, lighting the jagged cliffs around them. She could feel the child inside her pressing restlessly. As if sensing the fear she tried to hide, he built a small fire, keeping it low. "Rest while you can," he said. She shook her head. "I can't." He looked at her, the firelight soft on his face. "You must. Tomorrow will be hard." His tone made her chest tighten. "You mean to fight them again, don't you?" He didn't deny it. "They won't stop." Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Then let me help. There must be something I can do." He reached out, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. "You already have," he said quietly. She didn't understand what he meant, but something in his voice made her fall silent. She watched him turn back toward the darkness, his figure outlined against the moonlit rocks. There was a strength in him she had never seen in another man, and yet beneath it a loneliness that broke her heart. The night deepened. The wind whispered through the stones, carrying the promise of danger. Somewhere beyond the pass, faint and far, came the sound of riders again. He lifted his head, eyes narrowing toward the horizon. The time for running was nearly over. The desert held its breath, and she knew, with a chill that went through her, that before the sun rose again, something in their world would change forever. The sky was dark, filled with slow-moving clouds that blotted out the stars. The desert had gone quiet again, too quiet for comfort. The woman sat close to the fire, her hands wrapped around a tin cup, though the coffee inside had long gone cold. Her eyes followed the Apache as he moved silently along the rocks, checking the shadows again and again. He had been restless all evening, like a man waiting for something he already knew was coming. She could tell he didn't want her to see his worry. But the tension in his movements spoke louder than words. Every time the wind shifted, he looked toward the horizon, his body taut, his hand brushing the hilt of his knife. The horses stood close, their ears twitching, their breath rising like smoke in the chill. She tried to stay calm, but her heart wouldn't stop racing. "What if they've already found us?" she asked finally, her voice barely audible. He didn't turn to her. "Then we don't let them take what's ours," he said. She didn't know what he meant by that, whether he meant their lives or something deeper. But his tone made her chest tighten. She wanted to believe they could escape again. But the way he watched the land made it clear he didn't think running would save them this time. A faint sound reached them, a distant metallic clink, followed by the soft whinny of a horse. The Apache raised his hand, motioning for her to stay still. He crouched low, moving with quiet precision toward the edge of the camp. She waited, her pulse hammering in her ears. A long minute passed, maybe two, before he returned, his eyes sharp. "They're close," he said. "5, maybe 6. They've split apart, coming through both sides of the pass." Her throat went dry. "Can we make it out before they reach us?" He shook his head slowly. "Not before daylight. They'll see the wagon if we move now. Then what do we do?" He looked at her, his face calm, though his voice was firm. "We make them believe we're more than we are." She didn't understand how they could do that with one rifle and a wounded man, but she trusted him. He began to work quickly, scattering the campfire ashes to dim the glow, then moving rocks and branches to make the campsite look deserted. He handed her a small pistol from his belt. "You know how to use this?" She nodded weakly. "My husband taught me once." "Good," he said. "Only if you must. Aim for the ground first, then higher." She gripped the weapon tightly, her palms sweating. "And you?" He loaded his rifle with slow, practiced hands. "I'll keep them from reaching you." The wind shifted again, and she caught the faint scent of smokes. Someone else's campfire, not theirs. It was close now, too close. She crouched behind the wagon, her body trembling, her breath coming in short, uneven bursts. The Apache disappeared into the darkness, melting into the rocks as if the night itself had swallowed him whole. She waited. The minutes stretched, heavy and long. Then came the sound hoofbeats, moving carefully but surely closer. Voices followed, low and rough, the kind of tone that carried greed and danger. "Tracks lead this way." One man said, another answered, "I told you they couldn't be far." Woman, wagon, and an Indian. Easy pickings. Her stomach twisted. She pressed her hand over her mouth to keep from making a sound. The voices came nearer until she could see the shapes of men through the dim moonlight shadows on horseback. Rifles glinting faintly. There were 6 of them. The leader, a broad man with a scar across his jaw, dismounted first. He walked slowly toward the wagon, his boots crunching over gravel. "She's here," he said softly. "Can feel it." He was only a few steps away when a sudden sound cracked through the air, a gunshot that shattered the quiet. One of the riders cried out, falling from his horse. The rest ducked low, shouting the Apache had struck first. From the rocks above, flashes of light broke the darkness, echoing across the canyon walls. The outlaws scattered, returning fire, their bullets striking the earth and wagon with sharp thuds. The woman ducked, clutching her belly, praying the baby would stay still. Find him. Someone shouted. Another voice yelled, "He's up there by the ridge." The Apache moved fast, using the terrain like part of his own body. Each shot he fired sent another man diving for cover. He was outnumbered, but his aim was steady, his steps silent. Still, she could hear in the rhythm of his shots that his bullets were running low. One of the outlaws. The scarred man crept toward the wagon, keeping low. She saw him coming before he saw her. Her hand shook as she raised the pistol, trying to steady it like her husband had once taught her. Her heart hammered so hard it drowned out everything else. When he stepped close enough, she fired. The sound tore through the air, and the man stumbled backward, shouting in pain. She didn't know if she had hit him, but it was enough. He fell behind a rock, cursing. From the ridge, the Apache fired again, taking down another rider. The fight raged for what felt like forever, then fell suddenly still. Only the wind moved, whispering through the canyon. She waited, afraid to breathe. When the silence stretched too long, she called out softly, "Are you there?" A shadow appeared at the edge of the rocksome, moving slowly, his steps unsteady. She ran toward him, catching his arm. His shirt was torn, his shoulder bleeding again. "It's over," she said, her voice trembling. "They're gone, aren't they?" He nodded, though his eyes stayed on the horizon. "For now." She helped him back toward the camp. He sank down beside the fire, his breath coming short. She tore a piece of cloth from her dress to wrap his wound, her hands shaking. He didn't flinch, only watched her quietly. "They'll come again," he said finally. "Men like that don't quit when they've lost. They come back angry. Then we'll keep moving," she said. "We'll find some place safe." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she could see how tired he was, not just from the fight, but from years of running, years of losing everything he had ever cared for. "Safe," he said softly, as if testing the word. "There is no safe in this land." She wanted to argue, to tell him there had to be, but she couldn't. The land around them seemed endless and cruel, its beauty stained by the fear it carried. She glanced toward the bodies scattered near the rocks, the smell of gunpowder still sharp in the air. The sun was beginning to rise, painting the desert gold and red, as if mocking the night's violence, as they packed the wagon later that morning. She noticed something near one of the fallen riders, a silver locket hanging from his neck. She picked it up, curious, then froze when she opened it. Inside was a small drawing of a woman and child, roughly sketched but clear. The man who had attacked them had once had a family. She closed the locket and placed it back beside him. A part of her wanted to hate him for what he'd done, but another part saw something else, the endless circle of loss that this land created. When they rode again, the sun climbed higher, beating down on them with relentless heat. The Apache sat silently at the front, his eyes fixed on the horizon. She could see the exhaustion in his shoulders, the weight of unspoken memories. "You said your brother was taken?" she said quietly after a long while. "Do you think he's still alive?" He didn't answer right away. "I don't know. The soldiers took many to the camps. If he still breathes, he is not free. And you?" She asked softly, "Do you still believe in freedom?" He turned his gaze toward her, his expression unreadable. "Freedom is what I am fighting for, even when it's gone." His words hung in the air, heavier than the heat. She looked at him, realizing for the first time that his fight wasn't just for her, it was for everything that had been taken from him. By the second night, the trail grew rougher. They reached the edge of the canyon, where the ground split into jagged stone. He stopped the horses and studied the sky. "We'll rest here," he said. "There's shelter below." So they made camp in the shadow of the cliffs. She found herself wondering how long they could keep living like this, always moving, always waiting for danger. She wanted to ask what would happen when they reached the next town, if they'd even be welcome there. But she didn't. Some questions had no answers. When darkness fell, the Apache sat apart from the fire, staring into the distance. The woman watched him, sensing a storm building inside him that had nothing to do with the weather. After a while, she approached and sat beside him. "You think they'll find us again?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "Men like that follow until one side stops breathing." Her hand rested over her belly. "Then we'll have to make sure it's not us." He turned his head slightly, and though his face stayed calm, his eyes softened for the first time that day. "You speak with courage. I've learned from the man who fights for me," she said quietly. The wind rose again, sweeping dust across the canyon floor. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled a storm gathering beyond the mountains. The Apache lifted his gaze to the darkening sky, sensing what was coming. The earth itself seemed to hold its breath, as if the next part of their journey would decide more than just their survival. Neither of them spoke again, but both knew that the real battle was still ahead. Waiting beyond the horizon, where the land met the storm arrived before dawn, sweeping down from the mountains with a force that felt almost alive. The wind tore through the canyon, bending the brush and sending sand swirling through the air like smoke. The woman woke to the sound of thunder rolling in the distance, her heart already uneasy. The Apache stood near the edge of the camp, his figure outlined against flashes of lightning, still as stone. He had been awake all night, watching, waiting. She rose slowly, pulling her shawl tight against the cold. "You haven't slept," she said quietly. He didn't look back. "Sleep is for when the world is safe." Her eyes followed his gaze toward the mouth of the canyon, where the trail disappeared into darkness. She didn't have to ask what he was thinking. The tracks they had seen the day before, the prints of horses moving fast, were burned into both their minds. Someone was following again, and this time it felt different. The air carried that uneasy stillness, the kind that always came before blood was spilled. "Do you think it's them?" she asked. He nodded slightly. "They found the trail. The storm will cover their tracks, but it'll cover ours too. If they reach the ridge by sunrise, we'll be trapped." Her stomach tightened. She moved closer to the wagon, checking the horses, though they were restless and snorting from the smell of rain. She could feel the baby moving again, small kicks beneath her ribs, as if the child knew danger was near. He turned toward her, his expression calm but serious. "When the rain starts, we move through the lower path. It's slower, but hidden. They won't see us from the ridge. Will it be safe?" she asked. "No path is safe," he said, "but it's the one that keeps you alive." The wind picked up again, bringing with it the first drops of rain, cold and sharp. They packed quickly, their hands moving by instinct. She climbed onto the wagon seat while he guided the horses forward. The wheels struggled against the wet sand. The sound drowned beneath the roar of thunder as they descended into the narrow pass. The world around them turned gray and wild. The canyon walls rose high on either side, slick with rain, closing in like the ribs of some great beast. The air smelled of earth and lightning. He led them carefully, one hand on the reins, the other holding his rifle close. Hours passed, though time felt strange in the storm. The rain blurred everything into shadows. She could barely see him through the curtain of water, but his presence, steady and sure, kept her calm. Then, through the storm's roar, came a faint sound that made her heart stop, the echo of horses. He heard it too. His head lifted, eyes narrowing. The sound grew clearer, group moving fast. "Too many to be chance travelers. They're close," she whispered. He didn't reply. He turned the wagon sharply toward the rocks, urging the horses to move faster. The trail became rougher, cutting between boulders and shallow pools. Mud splashed up, wheels grinding. She clung to the side, her breath coming quick. Behind them, the sound of pursuit grew louder. The outlaws had found their path. "Hold on," he said, his voice firm even against the thunder. She looked back and saw them, dark shapes through the rain. 5 riders pushing hard, rifles glinting in flashes of lightning. Fear surged through her chest like fire. "They're gaining," she cried. He didn't answer, only drove the horses harder. The wagon bounced violently as they hit uneven ground. One wheel caught against a rock, splintering slightly, but he didn't slow. Every second counted. The canyon narrowed ahead, and she could see where the trail bent sharply toward a wall of stone. "There's no way through," she shouted. "There's a way," he said. She wanted to believe him. But when they reached the bend, her heart dropped. The path ended in a steep drop to the river below, the water rushing wild and fast. The Apache stopped the horses, its eyes darting between the cliff and the riders closing in behind. She looked at him, panic rising. "What do we do?" He studied the river below, then the narrow slope to the left, barely a trail, but enough for one man to climb. "You take the wagon down the path, follow the water west until the cliffs open. I'll draw them away." She grabbed his arm. "No, you can't. They'll kill you." He looked at her, calm and steady, even in the chaos. "If I stay, they won't reach you. That's what matters." Her eyes filled with tears, her voice trembling. "Please, don't fight them. Not again." His lips curved in that faint, sad smile she had come to know. "I told you before. I'm already fighting for you." Before she could stop him, he handed her the reins and turned toward the ridge. She wanted to scream, to pull him back, but the roar of thunder swallowed her voice. He disappeared into the storm, his figure vanishing among the rocks. The rain poured harder now, stinging her face as she tried to steady the horses. They resisted, frightened by the wind, but she urged them down the narrow path. Every jolt sent pain through her body, the baby twisting with each movement. She gritted her teeth, forcing herself to focus on the trail above. Faintly through the rain, she heard the first gunshot, then another. The echoes bounced through the canyon like cracks of lightning. Her heart pounded as she urged the horses faster, her hands slick with rain. She couldn't see him, couldn't know if he was still alive. The path widened as she reached the riverbank. She guided the wagon along the water, her eyes searching the cliffs for any sign of movement. More gunfire echoed behind her, mixed with shouts. She couldn't tell who was winning then, through the curtain of rain. She saw movement on the ridge, a man on horseback, then another. They were chasing him. She could barely make out his figure as he moved between rocks, using the storm to hide, his rifle flashing in brief bursts. The riders followed, shouting curses, her voices swallowed by thunder. She wanted to turn back, but the path behind her was already flooding. The river had risen, cutting off her way. All she could do was keep moving forward. The rain began to ease slightly, though the wind still howled through the canyon. The world smelled of wet earth and smoke. She reached a small grove of mesquite trees and stopped the wagon beneath them, her body shaking from exhaustion. Her clothes clung to her skin, cold and heavy. She sat there for a moment, breathing hard, praying silently that he was still alive. Then, from somewhere up the ridge, came a faint, distant cry, a gunshot, then silence. She froze. The storm had quieted, but the emptiness that followed felt worse. Her heart thudded painfully, her eyes scanning the cliffs. There was no movement now, no sign of life. The canyon looked deserted, carved clean by the rain. She slid from the wagon, her boots sinking into the mud. "Please," she whispered to the wind. "Come back to me." She took a few unsteady steps toward the slope, but her body ached with fatigue. The baby kicked again, sharp and insistent. She pressed a hand against her belly, forcing herself to breathe. The Apache had told her to keep going. She had to believe he meant to return. As night fell again, the storm passed, leaving behind a heavy stillness. The air smelled of rain and blood. The fire she built barely flickered against the wet wood, but she sat close, staring into the faint glow. Every sound in the dark made her tense: the creak of the wagon, the rush of the river, the whisper of wind through wet leaves. She thought of his words, the way he had said there was no safe place in this land. Only the fight you carried inside. Maybe he had been right all along. Hours passed before she heard the soft tread of footsteps behind her. She turned sharply, heart in her throat. A figure emerged from the shadows, moving slowly. Her breath caught. It was him. He was soaked through, his hair plastered to his face, his clothes torn. His arm was bleeding again, but his eyes were alive. He walked with a limp, his rifle slung over his shoulder. She ran to him, relief breaking through her fear. "You came back," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I said I would," he said quietly. She touched his arm, feeling the warmth of his skin. "Are they gone?" He nodded. "Most. One escaped. He'll bring others." Her heart sank. "Then it's not over," no, he said. "It's just beginning." He sank down near the fire, exhaustion pulling at his body. She sat beside him, close enough to feel his warmth. Neither spoke for a long time. The rain had stopped, but the night carried a strange, charged silence. Like the calm before another storm. After a while he spoke, his voice low. "There's a place west of here, beyond the river. Old mission ruins. If we reach it, we can rest. Maybe find food. Will we be safe there?" She asked. He looked at her, his eyes dark and steady. "Safe enough to fight another day." She nodded, though her heart was heavy. She knew what he meant. That peace was only a pause, never a promise. But she would take that pause, if it meant one more sunrise with him alive beside her. When dawn began to break, the desert shimmered with mist. They packed the wagon again, moving west toward the light. The land looked almost peaceful in that gray glow. But the memory of thunder and gunfire lingered in every shadow as they rode on. She couldn't shake the feeling that the next turn of the trail would decide everything. That whatever waited at the old mission would either save them or destroy what little hope they had left. The Apache rode beside her in silence, the wind lifting his hair as the sun rose behind the mountains. and though neither of them spoke it aloud, they both knew the fight was far from over. The storm had passed, but the war, the one that lived in the hearts of men and in the land itself, was just reaching its breaking point. The sun rose slow that morning, spilling soft light across the desert like a promise the night had almost taken away. The air still carried a damp chill from the storm, and thin mist clung to the rocks, blurring the edge of the canyon behind them. The Apache rode ahead, his eyes fixed on the horizon, while the woman guided the wagon, her hands steady, though her heart trembled with each turn of the trail. The world looked quiet, but both of them knew silence in the wilds often meant danger just waiting for breath. By midday, they reached the open plain. The earth stretched wide and red beneath a pale sky, dotted with dry grass and twisted mesquite. The horses moved slower now, tired from the long night, their steps heavy. She could see the old mission ahead, its stone walls broken and half buried in sand. A ghost of the past standing alone against the wind. For the first time in days, a sense of direction returned. Maybe it wasn't safety, but it was shelter. That was enough. As they approached the ruins, the Apache dismounted and walked forward first, scanning the area. His steps were light, his movements quiet, the way only someone born of the land could move. He found old footprints near the archway weeks old, maybe more and remnants of a small fire that had long gone cold. He turned back toward her. "It's empty," he said. For now, she climbed down, her legs weak, but her spirit still holding. Together they led the horses into what used to be the courtyard. The mission walls had crumbled in places, but the roof of the old chapel still stood. Inside, faint carvings of saints and angels clung to the cracked plaster. The air was cool and smelled of dust and sage. "This will do," he said. She nodded, too tired to speak. He helped her settle on a blanket near the fire pit and began gathering wood. She watched him move, quiet, certain, focused. Even now, after all they'd faced, he carried that same stillness in him, like the land itself had shaped his soul. When the fire finally caught, its glow filled the chapel, warming the walls and their faces. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting herself breathe. The baby shifted again, a reminder that life went on, even through fear and loss. "Do you think they'll come after us again?" she asked softly. He looked into the flames. "If the one who escaped returns with others, yes. But not today. Today, the land belongs to the quiet." She smiled faintly, though the worry never fully left her eyes. "You sound like you've said that before," he turned to her, his gaze thoughtful. "My people used to say that peace is never given. It's something you guard with both hands because it slips away faster than water." His words lingered between them, heavy with truth. They spent the next hours repairing what they could of the shelter. He fixed the broken doorway with old planks from the stable, while she cleaned the small space where they could sleep. The rhythm of the work steadied them both. For the first time since the storm, she felt something close to calm. When the sun began to set, painting the sky in colors of fire and ash, he returned from the edge of the mission grounds with something in his hands, wild berries and desert roots. "It's not much," he said, "but it'll keep us for a while." She smiled, grateful beyond words. They ate quietly, the warmth of the fire wrapping around them as the light faded. Outside, coyotes called from the distance, and the wind carried the scent of rain far off in the hills. After a long silence, she spoke again. "Before all this, I thought I understood what strength meant. I thought it was about holding on to what you had, no matter the cost. But now I see it's more than that." He looked at her curiously. "What do you see now?" She met his eyes, her voice calm but sure. "That strength is letting go of fear. It's choosing to keep walking, even when you don't know where the trail ends." He studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "You've learned what the desert teaches. It takes everything until all that's left is what's real." That night, as they rested beside the fire, she couldn't sleep. Her thoughts wandered back to everything that had led her here, the town they'd left behind. The faces that had turned away when she asked for help, the road that had tested them both. Somewhere along that path she had stopped being just someone running from danger. She had become someone fighting for a life worth living. Outside, the wind shifted. carrying a faint rustle. The Apache rose quietly, his hand going to his rifle. She sat up, her breath catching. He moved to the doorway, scanning the darkness. The firelight flickered behind him, casting his shadow long across the wall. "What is it?" she whispered. "Movement," he said softly, but not close. They waited. Minutes passed. The sound came again, faint, then fading away into the night. Probably an animal, but neither of them relaxed until the stillness returned. When he came back to the fire, she looked at him, her eyes searching. "How long can we keep running?" He sat beside her, setting the rifle down. "Until the world decides to stop chasing." She gave a tired laugh. "And what if it never does?" He smiled, the kind of smile that carried both sorrow and peace. "Then we keep fighting. But not for survival alone, for what matters. For life. For the child you carry. For the chance that tomorrow might be better." His words sank deep, grounding her in a way nothing else could. She reached out, taking his hand. For a long while, they sat together in silence, listening to the crackle of fire and the soft hum of the desert beyond the walls. By dawn, the world had turned gentle again. The storm's memory had faded into quiet light, and the sky stretched wide and open. The Apache stepped outside first, scanning the horizon as always, but this time there was no trace of riders, no distant dust. Only the hush of morning. She joined him at the doorway, her shawl wrapped close. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "It is," he agreed. "The land always heals, even after it bleeds." They stood there together, watching the sun climb over the ruins, turning the stones gold. The world didn't feel safe, but it felt alive, and that was enough for now. They packed the wagon again, though slower this time. The Apache gathered what little supplies they had left, checking the horses and the sky. Before they left, she looked back at the mission one last time. The crumbling walls seemed to whisper something, a story of survival, of people who once believed, who had built something lasting even in the harshest place. As they started west again, the road stretched ahead like a long, uncertain thread. But this time, she didn't look back. The fear that had once lived in her chest had changed into something stronger. The baby kicked softly, and she smiled, resting her hand over her belly. The Apache rode beside her, silent but near. Every now and then, their eyes met, sharing a quiet understanding. They were both marked by loss, both bound to the same road. And though they didn't speak of it, they carried the same hope that somewhere beyond the next ridge, peace waited for them, even if just for a while, as the day wore on. The land began to open up into rolling plains. The sky stretched high and clear, and the sound of the river faded behind them. The world felt lighter, though danger was never far in such country. But the Apache seemed more at ease now, and so did she. By the time the sun began to dip again, they found a patch of green near a stream and stopped for the night. The air was warm, filled with the hum of insects and the rustle of grass. She watched him build the fire, his hands steady, his face calm in the fading light. "Do you ever wish things had been different?" she asked quietly. He paused, then looked at her. "Different how?" "That we didn't have to run. That we could have just lived somewhere safe." He thought for a long moment before answering. "If life were safe, we'd never learn what it means to be brave." His answer stayed with her long after the fire died down. She understood it now, the meaning behind every choice, every fight, every step through dust and fear. It wasn't just about surviving the wild or escaping men who hunted them. It was about finding something worth protecting. Even when the world turned cruel, the stars came out clear and endless above them. The kind of sky that made the world feel both small and eternal. She lay there, listening to the soft wind through the grass, the steady breath of the man beside her, and the distant cry of night birds. For the first time, she let herself believe that maybe they had found the edge of peace. When morning came again, they would keep moving, because that was the way of life in the old American land, always forward, always chasing the next sunrise. But as she looked toward the horizon, she felt no fear, only quiet strength. She turned to him, her voice barely a whisper. "You said you were fighting for me?" He smiled faintly, eyes soft in the morning light. "I still am." and as the sun rose once more over the wild country, the light touched them both to souls bound by the same road, carrying hope through the dust, proving that even in the hardest places, love and courage could still find their way home.